I often find that as soon as I light the moxa and the patient has the first whiff, which now with wearing face masks is slightly delayed, but it does eventually come through. But they have the first whiff of the moxa smoke, and then they go into their deep breath and they sigh out and they say, "Oh, that's so good."
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological. Gratitude is difficult. It doesn't march to the war drum beat of discontentment and outrage. Gratitude is quiet by nature. It quiets the mind's list of complaints and instead offers a prayer of appreciation in the present. It's not concerned with the future and all of its demands, nor the past with its flaws and broken promises, but instead invites a pause of appreciation into the present moment and the tapestry of entangled and countless relationships and the labors that all allow for a meal, a book, or a conversation in a room with a thermostat set to springtime. Gratitude does not make demands. It's not keeping a ledger. It is less concerned with quantity and more with quality. Gratitude is the antidote to entitlement and keeps us from indulging in narcissism. It's a gentle way to stay reminded of our greed and desire for more of what we crave. It tunes out the litany of comparison that has us competing against our neighbors. Gratitude might be the only prayer that you ever really need. It helps by taking the teeth out of our complaints. It gives a moment of rest from the ever-present struggle for more, and for a moment allows us to focus on what's going right instead of attending to the ever-growing list of grievances. Discontentment is a potent fuel for change. It's powerfully motivating, but it's a toxic fuel that, while it can provide the energy to push for the changes that you'd like to see in the world, leaning on disappointment, frustration, and outrage can leave you bitter and it can leave you resentful. I know from personal experience that discontentment can help you to get a lot done. It can provide the motivation to change a bad situation or help shift an unvirtuous trajectory. But leaning on it long term will gray your hair. It will disturb your sleep and taint your relationships with an acrid edge of angst. Gratitude does not mean we ignore the problems of the world. It does, however, help us to recognize and remember all the things working well that have brought us into this moment. And in doing so, bring a reminder of what works well in the world and to lean a bit on that. I hated pole moxa from the moment I was first exposed to it. The stink lingered like a cheap cigar, the smoke burned my eyes, and my tender lungs staged an instant revolt. The ultra-refined Japanese moxa was a different story, but the rice grain method was something I never mastered. Mostly, I've not used a lot of moxa in my work until I learned a bit of the Antake bamboo method from Orankaviti. This started to open up the world of moxa for me. Sometimes I throw a technique or a method on the junk pile. I have a go at it, but it doesn't sustain my interest. I would have liked to put moxa on that junk heap of discarded methods, but when I look at the characters for acupuncture, it's written right there in 2 characters: Needles, Moxa. So there is really no getting away from a relationship with mugwort. And I've been grateful to the folks that have joined me here on the podcast to talk about the fiery wool and their passion for using it in practice, as I don't want to shut myself off from something that is clearly as essential to our work as needles. In this conversation with Hannah Swift, we explore her love not just for moxa, but the plant itself, and how in Japan there's a whole culture and embedded economy around moxa production. Hannah brings the spirit of an artist to her work, and her fascination goes beyond its use in clinic. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out the new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lyle, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AccuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit acufastneedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
I've come away more inspired to use Moxa in some of the ways that we discuss in this conversation. Let's get into this now. Hannah Swift, welcome to Qiological.
Thanks for having me.
I am trying to think of how I came across you. I think it was because of Instagram.
That's probably right. I really enjoy the kind of visual and occasionally frivolous nature of Instagram.
It shows on your feed. Your feed is fun and delightful. You call it the acupuncture repair kit.
Yeah, that's right. It started when I was cycling to work. I had this kind of 5-mile commute. And so I would, on my way home and on my way to work, I would think like, oh, how could I describe acupuncture a bit better? It was when I first qualified. And then I started, I think at the time, Instagram allowed you to record 18-second videos or something very obscure. And I tried to condense an idea from Chinese medicine into 18 seconds and found it really impossible. And I would do it while I was cycling and kind of film myself doing it. And I nearly fell off my bike so many times doing it. So eventually that subsided. But the acupuncture repair kit name has stuck just because it's fun.
It came out of that. It's so beneficial sometimes to have a kind of creative restraint. You don't have 2 minutes. You've got 18 seconds. What can you say in 18 seconds that can connect with people and say something memorable and true about
Exactly.
acupuncture?
Yeah.
Acupuncture repair kit. Oh, that's just so inviting. Like, ooh, what's in that repair kit?
Yeah, and I think, it really links to this idea around our tools and our medicine being really portable. And I had, at the time when I started that account, I had this tiny puncture repair kit for my bike, which was like, I guess, the size of 2 fingers. And in a way, our toolkit for work can fit in the same kind of size of box. We can treat an awful lot of patients with a tin of needles and bit of moxa.
It's true. When I travel, I have it used to be my pencil case when I lived in Taiwan. It's this little fabric box with a zipper. Everyone in Taiwan, for some reason, when they go to school, they have to carry a pencil case. It's got your pens and pencils and erasers, and it's just a popular thing to have. And mine eventually turned into my acupuncture travel kit. I can put in enough needles to get me through whatever the journey is usually. I'm good to go.
Yeah, it's so nice.
Yeah.
I often think, I don't know if this has got historical truth, but I think of something a teacher told me once about old acupuncturists having their needles stored against their abdomen behind a leather belt and to kind of charge up the needles with their chi before using them. Obviously, it was before they were sterilizing needles, etc. But I kind of love that idea that, like, to really make those tools just an extension of you, that you just have them on your person all the time.
I love it. Yes. And I think it's one of the things probably many of us appreciate about the medicine is it's dramatically portable in an age when most things aren't, at least in terms of medicine care.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So again, I found you on Instagram. I don't spend a lot of time there, but I spend a little because I feel like as a presence out in the world, I should spend a little time there, doing research and stuff, for the podcast. So I came across acupuncture repair kit. And for whatever reason, the day that I came across your feed, well, first of all, it became very obvious that you have a love affair with Moxa. We're going to get into that in just a moment. But the thing that really got my attention was a post that you had about Aya and dreams and dreaming. I would like to know more about that.
Well, there are lots of things I could say, but I could go right back to before I studied acupuncture. I was making theatre and making kind of contemporary performance. And my theatre work became more and more therapeutic, to the point that I realized that I had to study something therapeutic. Otherwise, I was kind of beginning to enter a field that wasn't my own, that I didn't have skills in. And I made a performance project which was called Night Songs, which consisted of sitting in a place, various places. I did it in pubs, museums, festivals, galleries, and inviting 1 or 2 people to come and sit with me and tell me about a dream that they'd had. And then we would write a song together and record it. And the whole thing took 20 minutes. And some of the songs were just really exquisite. And some of them were funny, and some of them were rap songs done by 8-year-old boys, and some of them were people's first time singing. Sometimes they were intergenerational, so like a grandmother, a mother, and a child, all singing together about a dream. And sometimes the dreams were quite disturbing. And it was a really potent project. There was something about it. Anyway, that's what it was kind of in that mode of performance making that I realized I wanted to do something therapeutic. And I'd had a very meaningful experience of acupuncture over several years, and it was very obvious that's what I needed to study. So it's interesting that I come back now to dreams. I've been in practice for 5 or 6 years and learning about the effects of mugwort on our mental, emotional state and our subconscious, and our sleep, and therefore our dreams, is just quite wonderful. So I could say more.
Yeah, well, I want to hear more. I want to get into this theater piece here, and I'm using air quotes, performance. I want to get into this here in a moment, because as I hear you talking about it, and I'm just saying this now to stick a pin in it so I don't forget, as I'm hearing you talk about it, I think about how much of the work that we do, in a sense, is performance. We're creating a space. We're inviting people in to an experience. And what is anyone who is doing performance or theater, in whatever way you're doing it, but opening a space for people to dream in to themselves a little bit more.
Yes, so much.
So I want to come back to that in just a second. But before I do, can you give me a little more detail on like mugwort and dreaming, and how you use it for sleep or dreams? Or it's funny that you should mention dreams. I had an incredible dream last night. I don't dream a lot. It's been a full moon around here. I had a dream last night. I woke up after what seemed like a long time in the dream, and I tried to identify with one character that I thought I was, and I couldn't do it because I was all the characters. I've never had a dream like that. It really caught my attention. It's like, oh, all of that. It's all of it.
Really
Not just one
expansive.
thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, dreaming is up for me at the moment. So tell me a little more about mugwort and its connection with dreams, and maybe how you use it. And
so I think that there's a tradition in European folk medicine of smoking mugwort to enhance visioning and kind of shamanic journeys and dreaming in that sense. I've used it myself just as a tea, and I run this workshop. I do it kind of every so often at the moment, where I teach people to make moxa from mugwort that I've foraged locally. And the first time I did it, it was in person. Now at the moment I'm doing it online and I send it out, but the first one was in person, and I had this huge teapot of mugwort tea, and I just plied everyone with mugwort tea, and it was a very good workshop. Though I say so myself, it was fun and entertaining, and we made lots of moxa. But afterwards, I asked for some feedback, and the feedback was through the roof. It was absolutely astounding. And people said, this is the best workshop I've ever been to. It was absolutely amazing. And I thought, like, okay, like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, it was a good workshop, but, hold your horses. And then I realized, wow, we've been drinking a lot of mugwort tea, and we're all like ever so slightly altered. I don't know how people's dreams were after that, but there was definitely a sense of kind of like an uplift. And obviously in that workshop, we'd also done some moxa on ourselves, not using the moxa we'd just made, but using properly aged moxa. So we'd had this kind of full body immersion in mugwort, and there was, definitely a sense that everyone's minds were slightly tingly and enlivened. So in terms of dreams, it's a journey I'm just beginning, really, but drinking mugwort tea seems to elicit quite vivid dreams for me, and I know I'm not alone in that.
Mm-hmm. the connection to smoking it or drinking it, and some kind of shamanic inward experience. I'm going to say it sounds right, even though I haven't seen any of that in our Materia Medica. And again, there's something kind of evocative about your acupuncture repair kit in terms of image and word. So maybe I'm picking up on the dreamy aspect of that. But somehow the idea of mugwort as enhancing that kind of dreaming inner sense. And I try to put it together Chinese medicine wise, and well, it does nourish and tonify the blood.
Yep,
That's going to have an effect on the shen. It's going to have an effect on the heart.
exactly.
And then I think about the characters in Chinese for acupuncture. Zhenzhou, Zhou is moxa. So right in the characters that represent what we do with our medicine. Yeah, mugwort, it's right there.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. And I don't know why it's happened, but the translation of acupuncture teaching into European and North American colleges and universities has often missed out moxa almost entirely, or it's an add on, or it's the kind of 2 days of kind of this is a very smoky room and yeah, burning lots of quite cheap moxa and having quite a negative experience. Like I feel like a lot of practitioners just leave moxa by the wayside because it's inconvenient and it's smoky and you have to explain it and it feels more like witchcraft than acupuncture or something. It's quite loaded and um, more and more feel that it needs to be credited as 50% of the medicine. Mm.
Well, it's right in the name in Chinese. So there's one clue. We had a pretty solid education in Moxa where I went to school.
Great to hear.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we had a pretty good education in it, plus a lot of Japanese acupuncture teaching. And so there's that whole tradition with the little rice grain. For myself, that big stinky pole moxa, I hated it with a passion. I do not have good lungs, and I could not be in the room with that shit.
Yeah, I think you're not alone. It's hard. It's really hard stuff. I mean, it'd be great if you were in a field or you were doing, treatments somewhere where there was a lot of air flowing through your clinic. But it's not ideal for most people's clinic, pole moxa.
There was something about the whole pole moxa. I mean, just the use of it. Just, I mean, I hated everything about it, and I liked the little rice grain in theory, and I like getting it, but I don't have the temperament to do it very well. And so, like, maybe burning little cones on some ginger or something, is more my speed.
Yeah, I think it kind of comes into the realm of craftsmanship in a way, or
Mhm.
yeah, you kind of like I've just been doing some crochet, and it's a little bit like that kind of. You're working with this kind of woolly fiber, and you're making it into a shape, and yeah, and it does take time. I did a treatment recently where I only used moxa, rice grain moxa. I didn't do any needling, and it was interesting because the patient at the end, she said, like, oh, usually after your treatments, I feel a little bit altered and a bit sleepy, but I didn't feel that. I just, over the next 3 days, I had more energy. So there wasn't that kind of like cathartic sleepiness that can come where you feel drowsy on the bus on the way home, or yeah, things just are a bit slower, but she just felt like that there was a bit more energy in her system.
Interesting. Well, given that it's considered deeply tonifying, we probably shouldn't be too surprised about that.
Yeah.
I'm I'm curious, and again, I'm just sticking a pin in this because I'm going to come back to theater. I promise. Um, but I'm curious first to know how you so fell in love with Moxa.
Really, I fell in love with moxa when I was in Japan, and I went there with my dad a couple of times. I I thought that while I was there, I would go and find some moxa producers, and I got in touch with the owner of Kobayashi Ruoho, who make beautiful moxa that's usually organic or foraged from organic land or wild land, mountain land. I got in touch with him and I said, can I come and visit? And he said, yeah. And I went out to their tiny family-run factory, which is near Nagahama, near Lake Biwa, at the foot of Mount Ibuki. So it's a really mountainous region, and Mount Ibuki is kind of famous, and that area famous for producing the best moxa in Japan. And I have a little theory that might be because the mugwort that grows there is very resilient because the weather is so extreme. So on one side of the mountain, you have snow for a lot of the year, and the other side, sunshine. And so any plant that grows there, I think, has to make a lot of wool, which mugwort does very well, to keep warm, and maybe make more essential oils so it doesn't freeze. Anyway, that's my little theory, and I don't know how true it is. But I went up there and just hung out with them for an afternoon. And just seeing how it fitted into the landscape, hearing him describing how it was part of a kind of social economy where fishermen and farmers who are out of work in the winter are involved in the making of moxa, and that in the summer they harvest it in the kind of gap between crops. So it felt like it was not only a really intrinsic kind of part of being embedded in the land, but also part of the human experience of working with local resources, and to think of it as integrated into a community where there are fishermen and farmers making moxa just astounded me. I suppose in this country, my experience of acupuncture is that it's quite fringe, it's quite separate from daily or traditional skills. And just kind of hearing that it was all embedded really struck a chord.
Mm-hmm. This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. I've not been to Japan other than to change airplanes, but I have friends that have spent time there. And I hear that there are family traditions. They don't do any acupuncture, but they do moxa. They do it well. They've been passing it down from generation to generation. And in Japan, you can go and get a moxa treatment. That's it. They just do moxa.
Yeah, you can, yeah.
And then I hear you talk about that you did that in your clinic, and I'm thinking, wow, I wonder if there'll ever be a day maybe I would just do moxa. That's kind of an interesting challenge I could throw out to myself. Could I learn some form of moxa well enough that I could use it with that kind of capacity? I'm just going to hold that as a question. But this phrase that you used, I just want to feed it back to you because it really struck me. The moxa and how it fit into the landscape and it fit into the social economy. And there's something about, I mean, it could be in your case moxa, and thank you for that image because now I've got something to really juxtapose that horrible pole moxa that I still hate so much. Made a big impression on me, and not a good one, that pole moxa. But the idea of thinking about moxa in a landscape like you think about tea, they talk about tea the same way. Good wines, they talk about it the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things I'm increasingly interested in is whether the mugwort that grows where I live is more appropriate for my body as a moxa than something that I import from Japan or China. And I'm interested in that. And I took back, so I went to Japan again last year, just at the beginning of the pandemic, actually. And I took back some of my Scottish moxa that I'd made to the owner of Kobayashi Roho, and I showed him. He was very unimpressed, but he said he was kind of encouraging. He was like, "Yeah, that looks all right. It looks all right." But he kind of was like, "Our mugwort wool is better here," which I'm sure it's true. Like the fibers are longer. You just get more wool from each leaf. And I think to address your scarring by the pole moxa, I think it could be very therapeutic to take a pole moxa apart and grind it down and sieve out the bits and take out all of the little stems that are in it and purify that moxa, because it's basically very impure and
Mhm.
unprocessed, which is why it's so cheap and therefore so common. But it's kind of only halfway processed, so um, then you can get a nice product out of it.
I I love the idea of taking something that I have disliked and seeing if I can distill something of value out of it. That's a great idea, and later we're gonna talk a little bit about how to process moxa. That's cool. Uh, I wanna come back, I wanna circle back to theater, and, your night songs are just so evocative. Again, I like I said, I've been dreaming a lot with the full moon recently for some reason, so it's timely to be having this conversation. Hearing you give people an invitation to come and speak their dreams and make a song and then sing the song, then like, just take a little piece of experience and open it up and then express it. I mean, that really sounds to me, in some ways, what happens in an acupuncture clinic.
Yeah,
We invite people in, they share something that maybe they haven't shared somewhere else. Maybe they haven't even shared it with themselves yet. And then we kind of feed it back to them in the form of a treatment that inspires something in us that we call a diagnosis and then a treatment plan. But we're kind of feeding them back to themselves. At least that's how I think of acupuncture these days.
absolutely.
Someone's telling me something about
Mhm,
them and I'm telling their story back to them, but through a different
mhm.
medium.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. There's something very collaborative about that whole process, which I think is a bit different from some forms of medicine where you are being done to. You go with your whatever pain it is or problem, and the person kind of does a thing on you or at you or in you. And it's very different in our medicine. And I think, like checking in with the pulses feels like a really nice rhythm or something. There is a lot of musicality in the process of making a treatment, of holding that space, and be interesting in a way to map it somehow, like where you stand in the room and how often you return there. And like I go back to my seat and I take notes, and then I come over and I check the pulse, and then I go back and I probably do a bit of moxa. There's a
Mm.
kind of coming and going. Yeah, it's interesting. I think, and there's a cyclicality and sometimes a repeat, like a chorus or a refrain, going back to the same treatment as you did before, tweaking it a bit, having some variation.
Hadn't thought about the musicality piece, but it fits. It definitely fits. In your experience with theater and performance, oddly enough, I was treating a performer today as well, so the word performance is in my mind today. And I'm not suggesting that we're like actors in our clinics, but there is There is something of creating a space. I'm curious to know how. There's a question on the tip of my tongue. I'm not sure how to get it off. I think the question is, what would the performer in you have to tell an acupuncturist
Hmm.
about what might be helpful to them in their clinic?
Interesting. Well, I think to begin with, to situate myself in that, I always felt very ill at ease about who I was as a performer. So, more and more, the kind of performance that I learned to do was some kind of form of performing as myself.
Mm.
And I think I use that in the clinic a lot, being able to be authentic and share something that's true, but not always have to like be emotionally enmeshed in it, so I can share something that's just like a way in. I can say, oh, I had that problem before, like I understand how you're feeling, without having to kind of feel in myself or go into like having had that problem. It can still be about holding the space for the patient. And I think learning that being yourself is actually the most sustainable way to be, is a really key thing. Whether you're a performer or a practitioner, I think there is a role that we step into, but it doesn't have to be inauthentic. Like sometimes patients say to me, "You seem so calm. You must always be so calm." And I say, "Of course I'm not always calm, but I'm in my workplace and I'm holding this space for you, and that means that I'm calm. It's not I'm not pretending to be calm. It's just that role is requiring that calmness."
Mm-hmm. Part of the job, one of the job requirements. If we're not showing up with some calm, it's going to be very unsafe for our patients to expose much of anything.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Love the idea of performing as yourself, showing up as yourself. What's the job? I show up as myself. And I think you're right as well that when we really are showing up as ourselves, and I'm going to say that with the meaning of when we show up with ourselves, like all of ourselves, the part we're comfortable with, the part we're not comfortable with, the part that has experience, the part that is unsure and uncertain in the moment, when we show up with it all with a certain amount of comfort, I think it is easier to hold that space and not be so emotionally reactive so that our patients can express as they need to express. And there's plenty of room for them to do that. But we have to show up as ourselves. I was talking with a friend the other day, and we are talking about like at the beginning of anything, you don't really know how to do it. I don't know if you guys say this over in Scotland. There's a phrase here in America. We say, fake it till you make it. And I have always hated that phrase because I don't think we are faking it. I think our job is to do the best we can with what we have, try to learn a little bit.
Yeah, and we mirror as animals in our animal selves whatever's
Mhm.
going on in the room. And if someone's performing a great act of whatever it is, perfection, not having any shadows, um, never being angry, always being calm, or whatever their performance may be, as a patient, you enter a space where you will end up mirroring some aspect of not being true, not being authentic. The more that we can be clear with ourselves, the more we invite clarity, I think, from our patients.
Mm.
And then I think the interesting thing is that from that clarity, creativity can come, both for us in finding ways through, ways to communicate, ways to treat, but also for the patient finding new ways to think about things.
Yeah, so often our patients actually have some answers for themselves. They just haven't been able to say it to themselves in a way that they can listen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking too a little bit about improv. When I was a kid, I did a little bit of theater. We did a lot of improvisational stuff when I was a kid. And there's that whole idea in improv of you never say no. You always say yes, yes, and yes, and. And I think that works in clinic as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I heard John Hamwe speak recently about intuitive practice, and he said that he always says when he's just finishing up a treatment, he says to the patient, "I've got 3 things to tell you," because he knows that he's got 1 and 2 to say, and then he just lets the third one come out on its own. It's such a beautiful thing. And he just said, it always comes. There's always a third thing.
I love it. You put yourself on the spot. I have something here. I'm not sure what it is, but I trust it's going to show up in the moment.
Yeah.
I love that. Oh my goodness. I may have to try that in my clinic.
Yeah. I mean, you can always back out of it and say, oh, actually, there were only 2. But yeah.
Well, I just love that idea of pushing the edge of the envelope just a little bit.
Absolutely.
It's like I know this piece. I'm not sure about this piece, but I'm going to push myself into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, you go into a void, don't you? I think there's a lot of creativity when you go into a void, as long as it's a safe one. Yeah.
So the void, I don't know about other people's experience, and I don't know about yours, but when I come up to the void, I get nervous. I get really edgy. The unknown. Well, actually, I got 2 things. On one hand, the unknown is a little bit exciting. On the other hand, it's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. It depends a little bit what you're going in with, who you're going in with, what's happening in there. Because sometimes like the void in a treatment can feel a bit like something that you step into together with the patient and you say like, oh, there's a void, shall we go in? And sometimes it's not the right time to go in, so you say, actually we're going to leave that for today. And other times there's some courage in the room, and so you step in, and then it's creative.
And then it's creative. Well, a lot of the myths, all the great myths of the world talk about creativity coming out of a void, coming out of nothingness. There we go again with inviting something in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that there's something, going back to Moxa, there's something about how the smoke in the room makes you exist in the same space as the patient. Kind of, you're going through a physiological thing with your patient. You're both smelling this smoke, which has some slightly psychoactive properties. And you're like, let's transform this experience. Let's go there together. Which isn't, I suppose it would be the equivalent of like, oh, I'm going to put this needle in you and then I'm going to do it for myself. Like, let's both have yin tang or something. Because of that kind of creation of a smoky environment, you're kind of maybe in making the theatre of a void a bit. There is a catharsis and a ritual in that smokiness, I think. If it's nice smoke, not your pole moxa smoke.
Right. No, I have found that very high quality moxa lit with the right Japanese incense is luscious.
Yeah.
It's really luscious. And the idea of breathing in the same scent in the room, talk about bringing people into a sense of rapport. You're both there breathing the same smells, the same smoke. The olfactory sense is the oldest of the senses. And so there's some kind of connection going on that way. I hadn't thought about using moxa as a way to connect and create some rapport. But as we're having this conversation, I can see how that would happen.
Mm.
And here's the other thing. You talked about people smoking moxa as kind of a shamanic uh, way of moving into a sacred space. And so breathing that moxa smoke in the same room Yeah, maybe there's something going on with our nervous systems here that are bringing them into more of an attunement.
Yeah. I often find that as soon as I light the moxa and the patient has the first whiff, which now with wearing face masks is slightly delayed, but it does eventually come through. But they have the first whiff of the moxa smoke, and then they go into their deep breath and they sigh out and they say, "Oh, that's so good." And I've heard of people using hypnotherapy alongside acupuncture to get people to relax. And I'm sure that has an amazing effect, but I suppose I use moxa like that. I mean, I don't intend to use it. I don't think, oh, we need to connect more. There needs to be more rapport. This person needs to take a deep breath. I just follow the treatment principles and use the moxa, and then that's the out.
Yes. So it seems to me, I'm not a very intensive gardener, but it seems to me that moxa probably grows Artemisia. I think it grows in a lot of different places, doesn't it?
Yeah, it grows all over the world. I think it grows.
It grows all over the world.
It definitely grows in some bits south of the equator, but it definitely grows in many places in the northern hemisphere. And in most cities it grows. And, especially an abandoned building site, there'll be mugwort rather, growing there. And by a riverbed that's maybe flooded or that quite likes really depleted soil and a sunny patch. And you find it's so interesting. Like I've always had this, not always, but since exploring the moxa processes, I've had this feeling like there must be mugwort everywhere I go. And so everywhere I go, I kind of keep an eye out for it. And there are some places, like actually the place I am right this minute, I've looked for it miles and I can't find any, but I know there's probably some within like 10 steps from the door. I just haven't spotted it yet. It's really
Yes.
common. It also adapts really easily to different environments and it morphs. So there are about 400 varieties of Artemisia, so which is the family of mugwort. So if I was going to start a moxa factory, I would probably try to choose one or two varieties to work with, and that would be like for leaf size and the amount of wool that it creates. But it does vary a lot. Some mugwort leaves are the size of my hand and some are the size of a peanut, and some are really jaggy and some are kind of broader and softer. And
having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner. Because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital chi. And that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
Have you found any varieties in particular that lend themselves well to the work that we would use it for in a acupuncture clinic?
I haven't studied it enough to have a really good answer for that. But what I'm learning about at the moment is kind of the process of making it and drying it. And like one of my recent learning curves was that it's better to dry it and grind it fairly soon after drying it rather than waiting a year and then grinding it, because the leaves go kind of leathery. So I'm just using whatever moxa I find, mugwort I find growing locally, in kind of fairly good places where it's less likely to be exposed to pesticides and fumes. So I'm just learning about it kind of in this practical way.
And you're wildcrafting it.
Yeah.
It's also something that if you had a garden and you wanted to grow some of your own medicinals, this would be a great one to grow.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's all over the place. That's great. It's up in northern latitudes, which would make sense given that it's warming. So we would expect to find it in a place where it's colder. Now, in terms of harvesting it and turning it into moxa, tell us a little bit about that.
So harvesting it is best done just around midsummer, or when it's at its fullest height and it's grown all its green leaves, but it's not yet put its energy into producing buds and flowers. It's interesting because the buds are very woolly as well. And there's something about the way it grows where it seems to kind of transfer its energy and its woolliness to whatever bit of the plant it needs to focus on. So once it started transferring its focus to the buds and the flowers, you lose the capacity to get a lot of that good wool from the leaves. And the buds are a little bit crunchy. So I have made some moxa with mugwort I've harvested that has buds and flowers, but it's a bit inconsistent in how it burns because there are these crunchy bits. You're basically more likely to get burnt unintentionally with an inconsistent fiber. So you harvest it when it's ideally at its most consistent, which is just before it goes into that process. And there is, in Chinese traditions, there's a festival called the Dragon Boat Festival, which is, I think this year it was on the 13th of June or the 14th of June. So there's a tradition around that where people would go and forage mugwort. And there are lots of people who would collect their mugwort from moxa making around that day. Of course, when you're foraging in Scotland or America or Finland, wherever you are in the world, the seasons are going to vary a little bit. So I think going by that day that's appropriate for Chinese harvesting of mugwort isn't necessarily transferable to here, but it's quite a good guide, roughly. Yeah, if you harvest it, then I suppose you're getting it at its utmost yang. Really, it's like it's in the height of summer and it's at its kind of tallest and its most robust just before it goes into that next phase of trying to reproduce itself. So that's when you harvest it and then you dry it. I love to dry it on a washing line, or I've dried it in my car before because it was a really hot summer and it dried it perfectly. It just kind of baked it to a crisp and it dried it within 3 days, and then I was able to grind it and make the moxa punk. But I dry it in bundles hanging. I feel like it has something of a body in how it is in a bundle. I always feel like it's a very sacrificial thing to cut a plant. And there's something quite magnificent about how it is once it's dead and drying. Yeah, it really makes you aware of the sacrifice that goes into medicine, even just on a plant level. So once you've dried it, you separate out the leaves from the twigs. All of the plant can be used. None of it needs to go to waste, but you wouldn't use it all to make moxa with. So you could keep the stems for using as a fire starter, as tinder. They're really good fire starters. And you can then grind it and you sieve out the powder of the grinding process. So you separate out the leaf into a fiber, a wool, and a powder. And you can keep that powder and use it like as a foot bath or something like a skincare product or something. It's kind of got some antimicrobial compounds in it. So it doesn't need to go to waste. Also, I've heard that the moxa factories in Japan sometimes feed it to the pigs. So it's obviously nutritional, but I don't think it would be great to consume a huge amount of it. Though they do use it as food coloring in Japan. So yomogi is the name of mugwort in Japanese, and a lot of people in Japan would only know it as a food colorant. So those like green mochi balls or sweets are often colored with yomogi because it's probably cheaper than matcha, which is the green tea powder. It's kind of equivalent. And it has a history in Japan in the temples. And a lot of those green mochi balls are sold outside of temples. So there's probably a kind of, again, like this sense of it being part of a circular economy or in a system that's just kind of reusing all the bits.
And so then the part that's left after you get rid of the powder and you put the twigs, the stems aside for your fire in the winter. Now what you've got left over is basically leaf. Is that correct?
So it's like a wool. So it's like
So wool.
you get the kind of insulation of the plant.
Mm-hmm.
You're separating out the kind of living matter and the insulation. Of course, the insulation was also living. You're separating out that fibrous stuff, which you can see on the bottom of a mugwort leaf. It's silvery and fine and hairy. So you can feel it even before you've picked the plant. You can feel this kind of hairy quality to the underleaf. So it's really that part that you're separating out to make the moxa punk.
And essentially, what we want is that wool. We don't really want the leaf.
Yeah.
We want the wool.
Yeah.
I didn't know that before. That gives me a whole different perspective on the situation in some ways. That it's something other than leaf. It's a more refined aspect of it. You talk about grinding it up. What are you using to grind it with? And then how does it naturally separate out between, say, leaf and wool? Or is there something you have to do?
It separates very easily, but the more that you grind it, so I use a pestle and mortar that I got from Mexico, and it's very rough volcanic rock. The more that you grind it, the more you can separate those things out. So if you just ground it for a minute, you would begin to get this kind of woolly fiber, but it would have a lot of dark green still in it. So those moxa poles have a lot of that fiber still in them, and they're very dusty. When you take them apart, they're very dusty. And basically, if you were to try and make gold moxa from that moxa pole, you would get rid of all of that dust, and the dust is what makes it so smoky and contains a lot of the essential oils and volatile compounds that are quite aggressive to our noses. So separating out that stuff from the wool means that you get a finer product that burns more consistently and and the more you separate it out, the better quality your product is, basically.
And that is done through this iterative process of grinding.
Grinding and sieving. I mean, I use really simple kitchen implements. So I just use my pestle and mortar and a sieve. I use a metal sieve because I quite like that I can agitate the wool over the metal, whereas with a plastic sieve, you don't have that kind of ability to agitate it so much. The plastic is too malleable. And so my product is probably, not as refined as it would be if it was being manufactured in Japan, but it actually has this really beautiful color. It's kind of silvery green once it's created, and it doesn't age to that gold yellow of gold moxa. It more ages to a kind of pale beige. So it goes from this kind of pale green, silvery green, to this pale beige. So that aging process is about 3 years.
3 years. So how do you age moxa? Do you put it in like a container and then hide it away in the dark or bury it in the ground? Or how do you age moxa? I can remember a Japanese acupuncture teacher I had. And in between patients, she was always somehow fiddling with her moxa. She was separating this from that, and she put some of it in one bag and something else in another bag, and then she put in a little slice of dried apple because it was good for the moxa. She was always doing something with her moxa. She was constantly, I guess you could say, refining her moxa. She was always attending to it. It was like a friend who she was having tea with, right? Always cultivating it.
Yeah, that's so lovely.
Yeah, but when you say age for 3 years, how are you doing that? I mean, I think of some teas, you might press them and then put them in a, cool, dry place. How do you age your moxa?
So I put it in a paper bag, in a jar or a plastic tub or a wooden tub in the dark, and I just let it be. I often put something in with it, like barley or rice, or these little silica gel packs, silica beads that are absorbent, just in case there's any moisture that's either in there that needs to be absorbed or that gets in there, because I don't want the whole thing to go moldy. Really, it's quite rudimentary, and the paper absorbs a bit of the, if there's any moisture, that would absorb a bit of the moisture, and the tannins. I think the point of aging it is so that something happens in the tannins, or it releases tannins. So that kind of acrid smell of the moxa pole is partly because it's quite tannin heavy, and probably hasn't been aged properly. And when you get a nice aged moxa, it's a really mellow smell. It doesn't make you wince or turn away. It makes you like, breathe in and feel calm.
Great. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. And I've had other conversations with people around moxa, because it's been one of those. It's not a blind spot for me. It's more of an aversion that I've had. Again, the smokiness of the pole it's just not workable for my lungs, and I don't have the temperament to do little rice grain moxa. I mean, it might be a good practice for me to do, but I've got other places I'd rather put my attention. I like the idea. Actually, what I think I really like is the idea that I could have a hand in creating something like moxa that I could then use in my practice in a thoughtful way.
Yeah. Yeah.
That seems really inviting to me.
Yeah. It kind of beds your practice into the land, and the people that you're practicing on kind of ties them in with the whole ecosystem. Yeah, I kind of relate to what you say about the rice grain, though. I do use rice grain, but I am more inclined to use chinetsku, which is like the bigger cones that means heat perception moxibustion. So I ran this study trip last year in Japan, and we were taught by Sasaki Sensei, Tomoko Sasaki, she's called. She's a wonderful practitioner. She runs a mainly pediatric clinic in Tokyo, and she uses chinetsku almost exclusively. So her treatments are so speedy to watch. They're incredible. She's rolling and burning and putting them out all in kind of one swift action. She's an amazing practitioner to watch. And so when you feel it getting warm, you say it's getting warm, and then the practitioner takes it off. That's the mode. So there's not a burn. There's not the rice grain style burn or sesame seed style burn. So it's just warming. And because you're only using the insulating property of the moxa to stop the patient from getting burned, there's this very direct penetration of the heat. It goes straight in. And so if you warm up, say, 2 points on the leg, on the stomach meridian or any meridian, you're just pushing the warmth in, and it wakes up the whole channel. And so that mode it's very kind of rudimentary in a sense. It's not a super refined kind of act, and it's probably quicker than massage. You could get the same effect maybe through massage of warming the channel or warming the points, but it's just kind of quick, and it works, and it's very effective, and it's not that tiny fiddly process. You're making quite a big thing the size of the tip of your thumb and putting it on a point.
Okay, so it's about the size of the tip of your thumb. That's a good sized piece of moxa. And when you pull it off, are you just pulling it off with your fingers? Do you have like little tweezers? What is your method for that? I suspect in Japan they probably pull it off with their fingers because they're just so incredibly skilled with it at this point.
And I do that too. um, I just pull it off with my
You pull it off
fingers.
with your fingers.
It's so insulated. I think it's not so much about skill, it's more about believing that you're not going to get burned, because you pull it off, you make a little cone the size of the tip of the end of your thumb. It looks a bit like Mount Fuji, it's kind of pointy. So you light it at the top and it burns down and down and down. And then the patient says, it's warm. And you've got maybe half a centimeter of unburned moxa underneath some moxa which is smoldering, but the actual outer edge of that moxa has turned to ash. So you're not going to be touching red hot embers. You're just touching ash and unburned moxa punk. And then if you just do it quickly, you lift it up and you plonk it in your bowl of water and out it goes with a nice sizzle. And it's very undramatic, actually, for your fingers. Though sometimes my fingers get slightly brown and I look like a heavy smoker.
That's probably the oils from the moxa coming out. The unused portion of that moxa, can you dry it out and reuse it, or is that it?
I know that some practitioners do use it in other forms. So like you'd use it in a moxa box, or like Orankivites, bamboo,
Oh, put it on take, yeah.
where it's not coming into direct contact with another patient. I'm not really there yet. I'm very happy for it to go on the compost heap. I think, one of the things that I really like is the circular nature of using moxa, that I can harvest it from where I live and I can process it at home and I can use it. Honestly, I'm still using Japanese moxa that I buy from factories at the moment. In my clinic, I've not got into using my own moxa in my clinic just because I feel like I'm still in the learning days of how to do that, and it's a 3-year process. So I have got some moxa that's 5 years old that I made 5 years ago, but it's such a small amount and I'm just using that on myself. Just I want to get to grips with it really as a material before I start using it in my clinic. But one of the nice things is that you can use the ash from moxa as a kind of deodorizer, or it dries things out, so you can use it to kind of suck out things that are like pustular, or you can use it as a face mask or that kind of thing. So that's a nice circular part of it as well. Though again, I am gathering up a little jar of my moxa ash, but I haven't kind of established a real ritual with it or a practice. And I probably at the moment would only use that on myself because I'm using myself as a guinea pig.
Yes. Well, it's delightful to hear you talk about this, from finding it, going out and being able to scout it, and then harvesting and creating it. That just gives such a dimensionality to this thing. And I didn't realize that the grinding process is what would separate the leaf from the wool, and your goal is to sift out the wool. So I know a little bit more about moxa now. I appreciate that. Thanks so much. Anything else that you would like to share with the geological listeners before we say goodbye for today?
Well, just to say that I'm planning a study trip back to Japan for acupuncturists for autumn 2022. And my website is yellowempress.net. And so people can sign up to the mailing list there and find out more about that.
Terrific. We can put a link on the show notes page so people can find that directly. And any other resources you might like to share, we can put them over there as well.
Brill. Thank you so much.
Terrific. Well, thank you for this time today.
Thank you. It's been great.
One of the gifts of COVID for me has been to realize how vitally important it is for us humans to be able to share physical space with each other, literally breathe the same air, which we're encouraged not to do here in this time of pandemic. I've experienced firsthand how our nervous systems are built to function and regulate themselves when we're in the presence of other people. Isolation gives rise to so many ills. I appreciated Hannah's thoughts about how the smell of moxa creates a kind of intimacy as patient and practitioner breathe in the smoke and the scent of burning mugwort. Especially as the past almost 2 years has had us in a state of hypervigilance about being in the same room with others, this gentle aspect of experiencing the smoke and the scent of moxa could be a subtle yet connective part of a treatment. And as our medicine is so hands-on, there is something inviting about making and curing our own moxa. I wonder if I'd have felt differently about moxa if my first experience of it had not been that crappy pole moxa. And as it's sliding into winter here, I'm looking forward to experimenting with some of the other dialects of moxa. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.